So as I was saying, the association area, the cerebral cortex, takes all of this information that we get, compares it to the other information we already have in our brain, and makes something useful out of it. In order to do anything complex, we've got to have some area of the brain which pulls everything together, and that's what this association area does. Now, our language ability are usually contained in our left hemisphere, or our left side of the brain. Now, when you look at a picture like this, now try one of two things. To yourself quietly, just kind of say, first of all, try to say the word that it says. Blue, red, green, orange, yellow, orange, blue. Now, go through those about halfway down at least, and then go back and try to say the color and not the word. So, in other words, you'd be going red, green, red, blue, blue. Try it like that, okay? What's happening is that half of your brain is where the words are. The right half of your brain is where the colors are, and you're having difficulty establishing which side is going to say the dominant word. All right, now there are two key areas for language. Damage to either one of these will cause something called aphasia. Aphasia is when you can't understand or have trouble producing language. One of the areas we talk about is Wernicke's area. It's in the temporal lobe of the brain. Remember, the temporal lobe is where all your auditory functions are. Damage to that prevents you from understanding speech, or when you talk, you don't make any sense at all. I'm going to try this video on here, and we'll see if this video works. If it actually works, we'll play a little bit of it. I'm guessing it's not going to work. The next area is Broca's area. It is in the frontal lobe, which is your complex motor functions, and this is where speaking is very difficult. Your lips, your jaw, your tongue, your lungs, everything has to work together in order for you to speak. So in Broca's area of the brain, if you have damaged area there, you have to concentrate on every word that you form, so your speech will be very, very slow. Most people really aren't left or right brain. You hear that, oh, that's very left brain, or that's very right brain. People who are very left brain have they're a little bit more structure to their personality. People who are right brained a little more artistic, because they have to work together. You can't be all or the other. When the corpus callosum is cut, which is that little piece in the middle that connects the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, when it is cut, which happens occasionally when somebody has severe epilepsy, they do that so they quit having seizures. They cut that. If they cover one of their eyes or focus on a single point in the middle and something appears in their right eye, which means it goes to their left brain, they're able to see it. If something happens in their left visual field, it goes to the right side of their brain. They'll be able to see what it is, but they won't tell you the word or what it is. They know it's good. They know maybe it's a piece of pie, for example. They know it tastes a certain way. They know it's good, but they can't tell you the word pie because that's in the other hemisphere of the brain. It makes for very, very interesting research, but it's also like crazy the way it actually works. All right, now, how do we know so much about the brain? Unfortunately, it's very basic. What we get is from head injuries, from accidents. If I take a hammer and hit you on a certain point on your right side of your brain and then your left hand doesn't work, well, logic tells us that wherever I hit is actually the part of the brain that controls your left hand. So, unfortunately, that was about as scientific as it was up until just the last 20 years when we really started to do some research with tools. Now, a lot of it comes from a guy named Phineas Gage. This is a picture of Phineas Gage here. He was a railroad worker, and that big long rod that he has there was actually part of him. He was working around some dynamite, tapping some things down. Something happened, and this rod shot up through his left eyeball and out the top of his skull. To the surprise of everybody around, they all ran back over there to see, if he was alive, and sure enough, this thing had shot right to the top of his head, and he was sat up and started talking to him. Of course, he was bleeding profusely because of the head wound, but he eventually survived that, but it totally changed his personality. Before, he was a nice guy. Afterwards, he seemed like he was kind of a jerk, actually. You see his skull there on the right, with that big flap there is where that thing blew through the top of his skull. Unfortunate, but it's one of the first real cases of brain study. A lot of it's done through electrical stimulation of different parts of the brain. You'll see people that have had an EEG. It's this little cap they put on so they can tell which parts of the brain are actually working and which parts are kind of dormant. Now, a guy named Jose Delgado was a Spaniard who worked with bulls. He put an electrode into the hypothalamus, which, remember, is the pleasure center of the brain. And he had a little remote control type deal, so when the bull was in full charge, he would hit that remote, it would stimulate the hypothalamus, and it would quit charging the matador. Kind of neat. There's a picture of them actually performing that. Two other guys, which are very popular, a guy named Olds and Miller, they work with rats. They put electrodes in the hypothalamus as well as Delgado, but obviously they're working with much smaller animals. This is now the pleasure center of the brain. The research is not very reliable because a rat's brain is only about the size of the end of your finger, so you can't compare that little bitty brain. It's very primal to our big brain. But they found that when they put these electrodes in the rats, they would do anything to get that electrical stimulation. They would cross a electrified grid, which they wouldn't even cross if they were starving to death, but they'd still do it in order to get that stimulation to the hypothalamus. There's Olds, and there's Miller, and there's the poor rat with the electrode drilled into his brain. Electroencephalograph, we've kind of spoken about that in the first chapter. This is the EEG, read your brain waves, help diagnose psychological disorders, locates tumor. It's very unintrusive. You could do that and walk home. It really doesn't hurt or doesn't take any surgery at all. They just put a cap on you, run the thing, and it's no big deal. Computerized axial tomography is a little bit more serious. CAT scan kind of slices your brain into a million different pieces photographically. Obviously, it doesn't do it for real. It would kill you. No, wait, that's not a CAT scan. This is a CAT scan here, but it slices all these little different pieces. You can see this person has a slight tumor. In that second picture, you can really see it quite well. An MRI is very similar to a CAT scan. You can measure a few different things with an MRI. A lot of people have had that on their legs and their bones, and they use it on your head too. The CAT scan gives you a very, very good picture of what is in your brain. There's another CAT scan there. That person there has a tumor right in the middle on the right-hand side there. Positron emission tomography is not so much a diagnostic type thing, but more of a research type deal. It tells you what part of the brain is using blood, what part's not. If you're doing different things, like say you're playing the piano, one part of the brain will get a lot more stimulation, or if you're then another part of the brain if you're reading or making a fist. So all different parts of the brain get stimulated at different times, and that's what the positron emission tomography will do for you. All right, let's look at the endocrine system for real quick. This, of course, will change your behavior. It's made up of glands which secrete hormones into your bloodstream. Hormone stimulates growth in a lot of different reactions. They all have specific receptor sites for that. The pituitary gland, it's pea-sized, it's just below the hypothalamus. It's really tucked in there. It's their master gland. It's responsible for your growth hormone, your prolactin for mothers, which causes her to produce milk, and oxytocin, which causes a mother to go into labor. If you have an overactive pituitary, you get very, very large. This is Robert Wadlow. He was 7 foot 11 inches tall. He only lived to be 22 years old. He died of an infection. He was still growing at the time. That's his father on his right side there. He died relatively young of a rare blood infection because he had to wear braces and it got infected, and that's how he passed away. But he was still growing. He was 7 foot 11 when he died. There's another picture of him, very, very big. What is that? Okay, this another picture. A guy named Andre the Giant. He had an overactive pituitary as well. He was very, very large, very strong. He was obviously a pro wrestler. They say when you met him, the one thing you remembered about him is the size of his hands. His hands were massive. You could take an egg and pass it through his ring. That's how big around his fingers were. So very, very, very large man, very strong. both of these guys had overactive pituitary glands. The thyroid gland is located in your neck. It's responsible for your thyroxine. It affects your metabolism. If you have a thyroid that's not working correctly, you don't metabolize your food as much. In other words, you don't burn energy as quickly. So you get very, very fat because it stores fat rather than burns it. So these people that are shut-ins, usually they have some type of a thyroid issue which doesn't allow them to process fat correctly. Then you have your adrenal gland. It's located above your kidneys. The outer layer of this produces your corticosteroids, which they try to reproduce for pro athletes. That's the big worry, of course, in baseball and football and all that. For muscle development, resistance to stress, and it also produces your adrenaline. When this adrenaline kicks, you're able to do things that normally you would not be able to do. There are stories about housewives, common housewives, lifting cars off of their kids or something trapped underneath there. Of course, they'd pay for it later. The next day they'd be incredibly sore because it just shuts down all those pain indicators. But that's what adrenaline can do for you. So the male sex hormone, your male sex organs, testes, produce your testosterone. Women have a little bit of it. Everybody's got Aunt Betty that's got a little bitty mustache. In the prenatal period, it determines the sex of the child. Now, I know you've always been told it's XY, but the sex characteristics, in other words, your sex organs, are produced based on this testosterone. If there's not enough there, you end up with people who have both sex organs or neither one or something along that line. In the adolescent age, muscle and bone growth, primary sex characteristic, which would be your sperm production, and then your secondary characteristics like facial hair, chest hair, things like that. The ovaries, other than the egg thing, produce estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen aids in the development of the breast, and progesterone stimulate the female reproductive organs, prepares the body for pregnancy, gets you ready for that big shift when you get ready to have a baby. Together they regulate the menstrual cycle, and changes in this level of estrogen produce PMS, which we all suffer from either directly or indirectly from about once a month because these estrogen levels are off the charts. Now, heredity, you know what that is. You've had biology, so it's transmission of characteristics from parent to offspring. We know physical stuff, but they've also had some less psychological traits such as shyness, leadership, aggressiveness. Those are all passed down as well. A lot of disorders can also be linked. Depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, alcoholism. If your parents are alcoholics, don't even start because you get a very high susceptibility to alcoholism. Those things are passed down. Schizophrenia sometimes even skips a generation. So, where's all that go? It's from your genes, your basic building blocks of hereditary traits located on the chromosomes. I think you know most of this stuff. We have 46 or 23 pairs. They're all the same in females as a male except for that 23rd, which determines your sex. The baby's born without 46. Physical or behavioral disorders may result. Most of the time it will not even make full term. When a baby has an extra 21st, they usually have Down syndrome, usually some level of retardation or other health problems. A lot of these kids, you don't see many elderly senior citizens because of these health problems that they have. Everything is just doesn't jive quite correctly. So that is the end of this lecture, and hopefully you'll be able to do the review based on what I've just told you and then take the test. And everything else from this rest of the semester is going to run quite smoothly, I promise you.